share it with you once.
That would be super, yeah.
Monday, they'll just send it.
They'll have to post.
Hello.
I'm gonna make.
Hey Eva,
Hello.
how are you doing?
There we go.
Okay.
I'm gonna put you on the big screen.
Put me
If you
on
don't
the big
mind.
screen. Yeah, it will feel like yeah, like I'm looming over the classroom. Oh, like I'm Marlon Brando in Superman, a big floating head.
Is this working?
Hello.
Hello.
Yay, got a wave. Yes. I can see like 2 people.
I think some more. There is more students in the background.
How are you all doing?
Good.
Yeah. I hope you've had a busy day. 4 o'clock is obviously a hard time to suddenly be like, oh, now let's watch a presentation.
Are the other people not coming to here in the?
I mean, I just told them again. I think Val's finishing filming and then she's gonna come over.
Everybody's so busy with their final projects.
Yeah, but it's I mean there's never a perfect time. You know, that is the mirage, the promised land of this perfect time. But also, yeah, towards the end of a semester, it's tough. It's tough because everything is pressing, and like to find a bit of space. Like you probably don't want new information in your head. You don't want to have new things. But for those of you who, yeah, like I hope you can, like you're also perhaps treating this as a break. Maybe it's like I just cannot think about the shit I've got to do anymore. I just need a break. So I'm going to be that distraction. I'm just forget about all the other stuff for a little bit. You're in safe hands. It's kind of going to be like a guided meditation, but without any actual well-being benefits. But we're going to talk about knitting and design, and yeah, hopefully I'll make this a calming space. I'll find that balance between energy and the gentle, relaxing tone of voice. Yes.
Yeah, I think. Let me just check it is recording. It says, yeah, recording. That it says at the top, recording. Let everyone know they've been recorded. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see a little red dot, and it's counting down, or counting up. Sorry.
So yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. And
Oh, you're welcome.
we're very excited. So I think we can start, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna just do a medley of my greatest hits, obviously sort of framed to the audience. So I'm not very good at keeping it short, but I'm gonna like give you a bunch of images. So just let them flow over you and I will talk through them. But what I've tried to do is go into a bit of detail about some of the design process for a couple of projects, because you know you're the audience who might appreciate that in a way that perhaps when I've talked about my work to other groups it wouldn't necessarily be relevant, but we can kind of get into a bit of nerdy detail around pixels and things. So yeah, I've picked out a few projects to talk about the way I approach knitting in terms of design and maybe its relevance to other media such as screen and data visualization and site-specific installation. I'll just start off with, so this thing at the back, this green thing, I'll just go grab it actually.
Oh, it's
So I suspect you might recognize this because through your Hacking the Knit workshops, I believe you've already spoken with Rudiger Schlummer.
Yeah.
So this is his pattern. He kindly sent me some of the letters during the pandemic so I could knit them out, because I've been following his project since I think I came across it at Typo Berlin in 2018. This is someone who's really gone. No, I was going to say down the rabbit hole. What I mean is like they've really gone deep with, well, what does it mean to combine, you know, a design process with a very different medium, which is knitting. So, but what I really like about this example particularly, this was machine knitted, is that it's a translation of design. It's a translation of letter forms through two mediums, and they both play with the restrictions of that medium and our perception of how we interpret that information. So obviously, so this is obviously knitted now, but actually the actual original design is referencing aliased type. So that is how letters are presented on screens in a way that makes them perhaps give them qualities they don't inherently have. So you kind of get these softer edges with these. You got the main core of the letter here, but rather than it be so, it doesn't appear just like pixel art. You have these softer edges where essentially you have different shades of grey. But in order to do that, render that in knitting, you know, we can't change yarn. You've only got 2 yarns necessarily per row, so you actually have to use halftones and things like that. So I find that it's such a clever and elegant way to think about how we see letters across 2 mediums and to translate one translation into another one. So I really love this. I love that project, but I really enjoyed actually having a go at seeing what that's like to knit. So I'll start and talk a little bit about type briefly, since that's where we're at, but I'll just share my screen. Hang on, this is the share tray. Open the share tray. Is that right? I'm guessing the share tray is going to share my screen. Okay. And you should now see my keynote. I can go full screen. Can you all see that? I can't see you. I feel lost now. This is really weird.
I just put us on mute, but we can see it good.
Great. So it should say,
Yeah.
just shout out, because now I'm driving blind. It's definitely like a radio. So
Okay.
yeah, so we're in the ballpark of knitted typography. My relation to this is I started running workshops with kids in libraries in Liverpool, and it was around in the context of making. So I was like, well, I'll do a machine knitting workshop, but actually, what can I get them to knit? And I was like, well, I could do some pixel art, but I was like, actually, well, you know, people often just want to see themselves or have something of themselves. So if we get them to write their name, that's actually a good way to then talk about design and letter forms and the restrictions of knitting. So I did these workshops with kids where we're thinking about pixel art letter forms and how you have to work within the restrictions of the punch card, which I'll come to later. And it was really interesting seeing how young kids approach design and typography, and it's a different thing to my experience of working with students in Manchester on graphic design, and also then later at a type conference. But we had some really nice outcomes from that, and it was really fun. It really worked as an activity. Not everything I've done often works, but this one did because I think it was simple. And it, you know, it's a part of this is about the giving people the chance to just get on the machine and have that experience, but it's also part of them thinking about design as well. So we produced a book that you can download the ebook for free, where essentially we just put all these.
Sam, sorry to interrupt.
Yep. Hello. Hang on. Hello. I've lost you.
On a different computer.
I'm just getting little bits of delay or something.
So basically, slides weren't moving. We were on slide number 1 all this time. I imagine that was not meant to be. I don't know why this is happening. It did happen before when Rudiger was giving his talk. So I'm not entirely sure why. Is that because we are on a screen?
I suspect it's just Teams being a bit shit, really.
Sorry. So yeah, can we try again? Just going over those slides.
Yeah, sure. We'll go again. And I'll give up. And if this doesn't work, do you want to try Zoom?
Could do, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll give this the 2-minute test. If it's not working, I'm gonna start Zoom. I'll send you a link. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So.
Yeah, this is now good. I think
Okay.
when you put it on slideshow, it doesn't work.
Okay. Okay. Well, you can also then see where I'm up to. So these are the worksheets I made for the AlphaKnit workshop. And you can see I was working with some really young kids. I think the oldest one was 1.5. and obviously they didn't design a letter form there, but they put some marks down and we had to interpret that as a letter. And these are the happy type designers showing off their type samples in the library. Slide 6. This is the book that we made. You can download it as an ebook, and it's in the tradition of it's sort of self-published knit patterns, which I'll touch on briefly a bit later. But you see, you know, in theory, you could recreate this pattern. So you see the pattern, and of course, how that translates into a knitted artifact. A year later, I was asked to actually. I should say I'm not a type designer. I'm not really a graphic designer, but I've ended up working with graphic design and working with type a little bit. But I know people who are actual type designers, such as Jonathan Hitchin here, and I roped him into the last workshops, and we were asked to do a workshop at Typo Berlin in 2018. So actually, this was like reframing some of those activities, but for actual type designers to see what they would make within that knitting punch card space. And yeah, you can imagine they took it very seriously. Remarkably, a lot of them, even though we gave them this sort of design space, we gave them this grid to work in, a lot of people were much more precious, and they would go all around the paper everywhere but the grid, in case they made a mistake, even though we had lots of paper. And I think is something when you get better or more invested in any kind of practice, it becomes sometimes harder to you don't want to make a mistake. You have this idea of what is good, and what was interesting working with the kids is, well, they're not going to necessarily care about that. They're just going to just try. And actually they would produce unusual form, you know, they would make decisions I wouldn't necessarily make. At the same time, then working with more, you know, professional type designers, the level of detail was fantastic, and it was really lovely. But also, they were thinking very much about the traditions of letter forms. But what was interesting was seeing how they approached this as also a pattern, how these things repeat. So this project, I guess where it differs from Rudiger's is not so much about the type, but it's about its potential to be a pattern, and where that kind of sense of legibility breaks down. And can we just enjoy it simply as this visual rhythm? This one was my personal favorite. This is the A, so we got this blue A, but the way it's nested vertically is really pleasing to me. So the pattern repeat on these things, they're designed to repeat horizontally, but also vertically. And this has a beautiful looping quality. So that was the final alphabet. Are we good so far? I haven't lost you. I'm going to go into the next section. I'll just presume okay. Okay. So yeah, just to contextualize my interest in knitting, I'm not a knitter. I'm not a knitter. My background is in video, and I love cinema. I love the moving image. I currently work as a technician in Montreal for a video distribution company for artist film. So a lot of my own personal practice has come from thinking about screens and thinking about moving images and the spaces in which people enjoy these moving images. I love old video as well. I'm going to have to click these to play. I love old technology. I love the restrictions of an old piece of video equipment will bring in terms of design and just in terms of image quality as well. But about, 10 years ago, pretty much, I met a group of people, a group of artists that changed my life, or certainly changed my practice. This is the Nephra Good Neighbours community group in New Moston in North Manchester. This is Barbara, one of the knitters. So I was making a documentary about this knitting group, and they had these things called knitting machines, which you can see here in front. And I was like, well, what the hell is this? And they said, oh, it's a knitting machine. And I was like, well, what does it do? And they said, well, it knits, dummy, but it knits very quickly. And this was appealing to me because I can't hand knit, and I'm quite impatient. So I like to try stuff and I like to have results. I'm not very good with very slow processes like gardening or anything like that. So we started experimenting together, and I learned to knit with them. This is the lady who taught me to knit the most, and she's been a big influence on my practice. This is Iris Cooper. We did some strange events. This was a live knitting performance in a music venue in Manchester. And there were two kinds of knitting machine that we had. We had the punch card knitting machine, which I'm going to talk about a lot, which is mechanical. But Iris was also really keen on hacking the electronic knitting machine. And so we managed to do that. We managed to use a hack by Becky Stern of Adafruit. And we made this cable, and it meant we could send digital images to the knitting machine, certain models of these brother domestic knitting machines. And yeah, so we did what everyone does when they have a technological breakthrough. We knitted cats and dogs. We did a lot of cat cushions, not necessarily pushing the conceptual and artistic boundaries, but important steps nonetheless. and it's just mind blowing. It's like this. Now you can knit anything. It's fantastic. It's but that cable itself was this really fascinating bridge between, you know, digital interfaces, and then you've got this mechanical front end. So the knitting machine, it's a beautiful piece of engineering. It can knit 200 stitches in a row. But what was interesting for me, that although the hacked electronic stuff was just opened up so much, I was really fascinated just by the core element of what it means to knit an image and the restrictions within that. This interface, the punch card interface, really fascinates me, because it starts to link to other practices, but it's a really, really nice design restriction. These punch cards are like the standard set that you can get if you get an old knitting machine. You might be lucky enough to get this pack that came with it, and you can see they're just like motifs and patterns, but they're designed to repeat horizontally, and they're designed to loop and repeat vertically, and so you get stuff like this. It's so thinking about what some of the restrictions of that medium. The core restriction is that it's 24 stitches wide, and of course you can buy blank punch cards. Normally they're about 60 rows, so that's the space you've got to work with. But of course you've got these little attachment mechanisms. You can clip them together, so you can essentially append punch card after punch card, or you can loop it. So it can in theory it can be endlessly long, but you're always bound with this restriction of the standard mechanical machine of 24 stitches wide, and that will repeat across the bed. Okay, so that's it. That's your space to work with. But 24 is a really pleasing number for various reasons, some of which I'll touch on with my projects. But in terms of how it divides, in terms of things that it relates to, or that those component numbers relate to, and what you can do within that space, and the kinds of information you can work with. For me, my immediate relation to knitting and the punch cards were like, oh, well, this is just pixel art, isn't it? It reminds me of the computer games that I grew up with. I was a child of the 80s, so I had a ZX Spectrum when everyone else had a Sega Mega Drive. So I was used to playing with these very limited resolutions and these very limited color spaces. But they fascinate me, and I think it influences a lot of my aesthetic sensibilities of, you know, what I think is good, but it certainly influences how I interpret knitting. Like here's a close-up from Manic Miner that you just saw before. To me, these are beautiful knitting patterns. This is Fair Isle. This is a beautiful motif. It's the sort of economy of design and pattern in games design, early games design especially, translates so well into knitting. So I did a couple of experiments and workshops, just taking traditional game sprites and translating them into knitting. You can see, yeah, they go really well one-to-one. Although we're working with V's, we're not working with square pixels, we're working with these sort of slightly rectangular ratioed V stitches, but the actual architecture works really well. And you can, anything that you design for games and you can apply to knitting and vice versa. And so actually then we can regard knitting designers as the kind of first pixel artists before games designers. These are some samples from self-published design books. If you go on eBay, you can easily find these. I went through a period of buying too many of these, especially from Wendy Phillips, who I think is the true pixel art pioneer. She did this fantastic series of self-published books of different motifs. And again, it's like a really good example of how you work within a restriction, especially to make something, how do I make a panda look like a panda or a ladybird look like a ladybird when I've only got a few stitches to work with. But also this format, the printed format, to me, it relates to zines, but also the notion of sharing, that these data sets and these motifs, they're designed to be shared and recontextualized and reappropriated by other people. They are design assets. And this makes me think of other forms of sharing, such as the internet. So yeah, I think we've got to give a lot of credit to knitters for a lot of the things a lot of the ways we think about and share digital design now. My personal way into knitting, then, the first thing that I wanted to do was to explore knitting as a form of animation. So I said my background's in moving image. For me, the strongest analogy when I saw the punch card was, I was like, well, this is just like a reel of film going into a projector. It's a physical medium that if you put sequential images onto it, it feeds into this mechanical device that then renders the image in a new way on a different scale. So this, we don't watch the actual the material pattern here, but we then regard the outcome. We regard the piece of knitting in the same way that the film going in the projector. We don't hold the film up to our eyes to enjoy the film. We put it through this mechanical device that then brings it to life, and we watch that image on the screen. So that was when it clicked. I was like, well, oh, okay, I could put one piece of pixel art after another, like frames of a film, and make an animation. So the first thing I did was Muybridge's Horse in Motion. On the left, you have the sequence of images by Edwin Muybridge from 1878. And on the right, this is my low-res translation of that. So this is 24 by 18 pixels wide. So designed to fit on a punch card. So yeah, this is obviously a cornerstone of a lot of moving image art. You'll see a lot of artists, and anyone who's exploring a new technique to make a moving image will often do a Muybridge. I've seen it done with lasers on clouds by Dave Lynch. I've seen it done, even someone someone used CRISPR to alter a DNA sequence and then retrieve it from a bacteria. So yeah, if it can be done as a Muybridge, then you're pretty close. My question is, well, can I do this as knitting? Was interesting to me, because I thought, well, I'm never really good at one thing. I'm never a specialist at one thing. I know there's a lot of knitters who make knitting. That's the red circle on the left. And there's loads of digital artists making animations. That's the blue circle on the right. Maybe there's a sweet spot in the middle, which is, is something that I could do that might be a bit different. So digital artists making knitted animations. So this is I'll just play the knitted one here. So that's the final translation of the pixel art version on the left. So this was my first knitted animation in 2013. I've since discovered that someone, of course, already did this a couple of years earlier, like a hand knitter. Because I think, well, as I say, it's not necessarily a novel idea to make something on Muybridge, but obviously other people have seen the potential of, well, how do we translate other practices into textiles? And this has become much more prevalent in the last 20 years, I think. The great thing about once you're translating something into digital, then it goes into other mediums, it goes into other scales. This is a facade on the front of Fact Gallery in Liverpool. So it's the same design, but just rendered in a different media. This is, yeah, a kind of LED facade. I did another version of this project where I wanted to explore video encoding and data moshing. So this is taking it a step further. So we start with Muybridge's sequence on the left, and it will get data moshed into some fireworks. So this is a very digitally native process. And then it comes back to a horse. So this isn't something I could really plan out pixel by pixel. I had to use different processors to render a low-res version of this. So you can see that's the fireworks there, and it should come back to the horse in a second. So it's not as refined or as perfect as the other one, but in a sense, this is about trying to find those digital artifacts and express them in a different way. And here's the knitted version. So yeah, that's what it looks like as a reel of film. 13 meters long. It took about 4 hours to iron the bugger. It was lamb's wool, so it kept folding in. That design has since been retranslated into socks. Amazingly, I became a sock designer. Sadly, I've sold out. I'm trying to get the guy to make me some more. But that was a nice thing to be invited to design some socks. And yes, the socks animate as well. So this is a very small animation, the smallest knitted animation, perhaps. So yeah, I've really enjoyed combining these techniques. This is a project I did in Montreal. This is what brought me to Montreal. Knitting has been a way for me to develop projects and find audiences in a way and explore stuff that I haven't been able to do just on screen. I'm aware of the time, so I've put links to all of these animations on a Google Sheet, which I'll share with you. But essentially, this was taking different motifs from around the downtown area and different interviews and comments that I took from people and just smooshing them together into this big chaotic animation. And this is another piece called Tricoton 01. This piece is just done with punch cards, just slamming punch cards into the machine, overlapping them, but trying to really think about this sense of visual rhythm and translate that into ideas of synthesis and modular synthesis, and thinking about how sound is made. So in this one, actually, then the colors inform the soundtrack. But this is just an abstract 2.5 minute piece. So we've got a couple more subjects I want to get onto. So things I've been doing more recently, this started 10 years ago, but I guess it's still relevant. So I've talked a bit about the punch card as a design space, but what also is interesting to me is this term punch card has various contexts and various uses. So we have the punch card as a means of programming the knitting machine. We also have the punch card as an early interface for programming computers. And of course, those two technologies, textiles and computers, go, the development of those go hand in hand. But we also have the punch card as a means of monitoring and controlling labor. So in relation to the workspace. So this idea of clocking in and clocking off. So in 2013, I developed a project which played with this idea. And I decided to recreate this banner from 1817. This was the Robert Owens and the 8-hour day movement. So it has this very famous text: 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest. And this was interesting to me because as a freelancer, I didn't have a regular pattern of work. I was, and also the notion of like restricting work to just 8 hours and therefore having 8 hours of fun and 8 hours of sleep, that felt quite utopian to me. But actually this was a very hard fought for practice. The kind of 40-hour working week was something which it obviously didn't come easy, and to some extent it's been lost and fragmented by technology and different working practices, because the kind of spaces that we do work in, well, like here I am talking from the other side of the planet, from 5 hours behind. So this idea of when and where we do work has been really fractured, and those lines of distinction have been blurred through technology and through, I guess, different social arrangements. So coming back to the affordances and the restrictions of the punch card, yes, you can only fit 24 stitches on that space, but actually, as I said, 24 is a great number. We have 24 hours in the day. So for this project, I decided, well, each row can essentially log when someone does work, i.e., if I do some work, I will, in hour 1, I will punch that hole. So this becomes a way of capturing data. In the sense, that's what the punch card was doing in the workplace, was telling the boss, the company, when someone was working and when they were not working. So I like the idea of a data visualization, making a pattern from that information that mapped quite neatly onto the punch card space. So I developed a couple of different methods for inviting people to essentially log their hours over a week. So this was one of the print pieces. So people would just write the hours they did on here, and this blue area represents the 9 to 5. You can see that's 8 hours over the Monday to Friday. So we've got the days of the week on the left, and we've got the hours of the day on the top. And so I was interested in saying, well, if anyone works beyond those 8-hour days, that's going to give me a pattern that shows overtime. So here is one of the responses I got. You can see someone's working a lot of hours and some late nights. And if we take away the 9 to 5 from that, we're left with the shape on the bottom. And you can see then more distinctly the weekend and those extra long nights. So I've forgotten what this person was doing, whether they were freelance, but this was focused around the creative industries. And so this produces a nice pattern. Essentially, it's pattern design, but it's a pattern which speaks very specifically to a person and their working conditions and their working practices at a specific point in their life. So it's a pattern which needs decoding, but it means something very particular. So these patterns, I collected about 200 of these from different people, 200 weeks worth of data, and they informed the background of the design that I was developing. I did some workshops as well where people could knit their own. So here's some of the patterns, and these all got overlaid onto the 8 hours labor banner. And what it produced was this kind of glitchy effect. If everyone was just working within the 8 hours, the contract ascribes, then we wouldn't see any of these glitches. But every time someone worked beyond those 8 hours, then we would reverse the stitch. So this is what it looks like close up, and this is the final banner. And there's Iris again, and she helped me develop, like she helped me do the hems and attach things. So I kind of went from 0 to 60 very quickly, but it was thanks to having some great support from a professional knitter. So this final banner is 5 meters by 3 meters, and yeah, it's just a giant data visualization. So it's been on tour in various exhibitions. It's now part of the collection at the Museum of Science and Industry. But the project itself at that stage is finished. However, I've recently revised the project. I was asked to take part in an exhibition about work called Out of Office in the Netherlands in the new year. And so I redid the project, but just doing this smaller banner. So this smaller banner, to sort of knit it and package it and do all the hems, it takes about 8 hours. So it's this idea of actually the gallery would pay me for my labor, and they would get this banner as a kind of receipt, a proof of work. So the real work is my labor as an artist, and the actual, it's not necessarily the object. The object is the byproduct that gets shown as to point to that work. The actual pattern this time was actually developed from academics. So I asked people in academia. So at the time I was working as a lecturer here in Montreal in a university, and I quit because it was a lot of work. The conditions were a little bit too precarious and too much, but I was very interested in that experience of trying to stick to the 8 hours day within academia. So actually I thought I'd go into a bit of detail. This is the nerdy detail. I'll try and show you a bit of the process of this, and I've given you a link to this. So this is the kind of format that I would get the data in or put the data into. I was using a Google form for this. So this is my working week, and it tells you the week I was working, and essentially I've just got zeros and ones. So if I was working, in hour from 8 o'clock in the morning to 9, if I did any work, I put a number 1 there. If I didn't, I put a 0. And it's up to the people as well what they define as work. It's checking your email briefly, even if it's not for the whole hour, but just for 10 minutes. Is that work? It's a question of whether, has work culture, has your workplace invaded your home? If you're doing that, checking your email just before you go to bed, I think I would argue it is. It's kind of, there isn't that clear separation. In terms of how I manage this information, I'll just make a little copy. Oh, hang on. Nope. How would I copy this? I duplicate, that's it. A couple of things in order to, I'm going to have to open Photoshop as well, get that opening. How I work with this pattern. First of all, I would select the data set that I want. And then I would use format and conditional formatting. And I would let Google Sheets do the work. So if this is equal to 1, I can highlight it green, but in fact, I'm going to tell it to be black.
We can't see any of that.
Balls, sorry. Hang on. It's because I switched. Let's try that. You can see that now?
That's good, yeah. Thanks.
Sorry. I hope this isn't going too far down the rabbit hole. So just to explain, here's a spreadsheet, a Google sheet that I have. And so to me, this is a design tool, especially when you're working with lots of data. So the challenge for me here is how to quickly visualize that into a knitting pattern. So I tend to use these tools. So I'd use some conditional formatting to just highlight the information to make it more visual. So I'm going to tell everything that's a 1. If the value is equal to 1, then it's going to be black. And if it's equal to 0, I'm going to make the text just light gray. So now we've got something like visually I can interpret that as a pattern. I can see where the data is in a way that I can't so easily if it's just 0s and 1s. The final thing I'm going to do then, I'm going to take a screenshot of this, but before I do that is I'm just going to resize these columns to 20 pixels, and I'm going to resize these rows to 20 pixels. And then just do a little screenshot here. So now I should be able to open that screenshot in Photoshop. And I'm going to let what I need to get it down to is a 24:7 image. So a very tiny image, just pixels to send to the knitting machine. So I'm going to do that here. So I'm going to, because I've got it roughly in square dimensions, each data set is a square. It should translate quite nicely and keep the ratio. So you can see it's trying to do 24:7. That's the exact dimensions I need, but I just need it to tell it to do the resampling using nearest neighbor. And now we can see that it's just pixels. We've got a couple of grays here. We can get rid of that by, oh, my Microsoft Teams is trying to jump in. There we go. Get rid of that by using the threshold tool. So that's kind of the design process from doing something where I'm working with a lot of data, but I need to somehow turn that into an image. There may be better ways, but this seems to be, well, it's worked for me so far. I've left some more details about that. I'm gonna give you a Google Doc, which again gives you access to that, and I've broken down the steps in a little less hurried fashion. That idea of working with data, I have another project that this led me on to, which is called the binary scarf. So this project is about working with text and how do you express text in knitting. So we've already looked at text as typographic characters, but can we express text in a different way and use ideas of encryption? So I don't know if anyone's familiar with ASCII text, but this is the system that computers use to reference characters, alphabetical characters, uppercase, lowercase, but also basic commands and punctuation. And you can, if you type in text to binary, you can find online tools which will do this for you. And you can see here the word system in uppercase is translated into these 6 sets of zeros and ones. So you have 8 zeros and ones for each letter. And the way it does that is referencing essentially each letter is given a number. So the decimal value here, number 65, is the letter A. And the way that is expressed as binary, because essentially we're trying to get it to zeros and ones, is using this system. So you have a column on the right which has a value of 1, and every column going left then doubles that value. So in order to get the number 1, you simply put a number 1, you put a value, you put number 1 in the column 1. In order to get a number 2, you put a number 1 in the column